Shalom. We're in the book of Ezekiel, 44th chapter. Picking up where we left off last week with the measurements of the temple to come. We've talked about a lot of things about this temple design. We talked about how it's kind of like a palace of praise and a fortress of worship. It is designed in such a manner that it could be easily defensible. Talked about the Haggadah. I'm sorry, not Haggadah. The Haganah. Haggadah is a telling of something. The Haganah is the defense force of that time. Would have been the defense force of the temple. Of course, that term some of you probably know during the 1940s war, 48, 49, I believe it was, 47, 48, 49, somewhere in there, that Jewish freedom fighters went in, liberated the land, and the force there that was that went in was codenamed the Haganah. Haganah. But in this temple that is to stand again, I can only imagine that there's going to be Haganah, if only for ceremonial purposes. If you believe this is the third temple that will stand before the kingdom starts, or is brought in, then there would have to be probably a true Haganah. If it's only going to be in the kingdom, there would be no real reason for a Haganah. But if it's built to be defensible, then it only makes sense to me that there would be, at least ceremonially, be defenders. In chapter 44, he begins by saying, then, meaning immediately after the occurrences of the last chapter, or the last thing that he said, talking about the consecration rites. Then he led me back to the outer gate of the sanctuary that faced eastward. It was shut. Now, in the English, people tend to read this as he walked up to it, he saw that it was shut, and that was that. In the Hebrew, it seems to lend itself more to when he first got there, it was standing open, and then it was shut. Okay, seems to be, the way I read it, it seems to be an action word, not a status word. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, that it was the action of it shutting, or action of it closing. And Yehovah said to me, this gate is to be kept shut and is not to be opened. No one shall enter by it, because Yehovah, the Elohim of Israel, has entered by it. Therefore, it shall remain shut. Okay? That is what makes this gate so holy and sanctified. Not because it was designed, well, it was designed to be holy for him to enter, but it's not the shape, it's not the design, it's not the location, it's because that is where the presence of Elohim enters into the temple and has entered into the temple, and therefore it shall not open. Interestingly, a lot of scholars say that when earlier chapters, when it says that the gate that was at the east, he saw the 25 men worshiping the sun, and they were standing at the east as the sun came up. A lot of scholars believe that what was going on there goes back to what Shaul says in the letter to the Romans. He says that the pagans worship the created rather than the creator. And so these men had gone out to where the presence of the Holy One of Israel was to enter, and to leave, and they went out there, and instead of waiting for the presence of Yehovah to enter, they worshiped what they saw. And they connected in their minds the power of the Creator, and they connected it to the created instead of to Him. Only the prince may sit in it and eat bread before Yehovah, since he is the prince. He shall enter by way of the vestibule of the gate, and shall depart by the same way. Some people believe that when it talks about the prince, it's talking about Mashiach. Other people believe that it's another reference to David Hamelech in a resurrected form. But regardless, there will be one individual who can sit here and receive bread and eat in the presence of Yehovah. Then he led me by way of the north gate to the front of the temple. I looked, and lo, or behold, the presence of Yehovah filled the temple of Yehovah, and I fell upon my face. Then Yehovah said to me, O mortal, mark well, look closely, and listen carefully to everything that I tell you regarding all the laws of the temple of Yehovah and all the instructions regarding it. So when the presence of Yehovah comes, we're talking about Mashiach, and he says, listen to the law that I'm giving you. Just this week, I had a debate with a minister from a mainline church who was trying to tell me that Mashiach, he used the Anglicized Greek name, but he said that the Mashiach came to do away with the law. But here we see Mashiach giving the instruction, listen closely to everything I tell you about the law for my temple. Listen and do it exactly the way I tell you to do it. I see that as a contradiction. If Mashiach here says one thing and Mashiach in Brihadesh says another thing, they're not the same Mashiach. Does that make sense? And if they are the same Mashiach, then the mental health professional in me says he has a personality issue and we shouldn't be following him. But I know that's not the case. I know that everything that is said in the Brit Hadesh lines up perfectly with what is in Tanakh if you just read it through the lens of the Tanakh. Note well who may enter the temple, all who must be excluded from the sanctuary. Okay, there's going to be two sets of people who enter the temple here. All who can enter the temple, and then those who can enter the temple but must be excluded from the sanctuary. Okay? And say to the rebellious Beit Israel, thus said Yehovah Elohim, too long, O Beit Israel, have you committed all your abominations, admitting aliens, uncircumcised of spirit and uncircumcised of flesh. There's one for the people who say that circumcision of the heart replaces circumcision of the flesh. Mashiach here mentions both. He says, if you're not both, something's, there's an issue here. To be in my sanctuary and profane my very temple when you offer up my food, the fat, and the blood. Now, some people say, none of this matters anymore. But this temple hasn't been built yet, so it must still matter, right? Some people say, oh, these people that he's describing, uncircumcised, can't enter the temple. That's not what it says. He says the abomination is to let them into the sanctuary. That's two different things. Okay? That's like saying, if you're not allowed in my bedroom, you're not allowed in my house. There's a lot of people who come in my house that I don't invite them in my bedroom, right? Because it's the most intimate place in my home. Basically, who gets to go in there is my wife and my kids. My kids only by invitation, right? But many people have passed through my home and been welcome guests, but not been allowed into that inner sanctum. It also says that they allowed them not only into the sanctuary, but they allowed them into the sanctuary when the offerings of food and the offerings of fat and blood were being made. Again, it doesn't say don't let them in the temple. There was and will be a court for the Gentiles, for the righteous Gentiles who have kept the laws of Noah, or who have begun keeping the laws of Torah and simply have not made the full crossing over. There is a place for them in the temple. That tells me there is a place for them in the kingdom. Okay? I believe a lot of the people that we meet in the mainline churches who are so on fire for our Creator and are living according to everything they understand and just don't understand Torah, I believe there's a place for them, and I believe that this teaches that. This is a picture of the kingdom. That there will be many who are allowed into the temple, but not into the sanctuary. There are many who will be in the kingdom, but will not be reigning as kings and priests. Okay? When it talks about the nations will come and sit at the feet of those who know and understand, who will give them instruction in the kingdom, I believe he's talking about those who didn't get it in this life, but who were trying. Their hearts were in the right places. They just didn't have their eyes opened yet. And they'll have that opportunity to sit at the feet of people who learned it in this life. You have broken my covenant with all your abominations. You have not discharged the duties concerning my sacred offerings, but have appointed them to discharge the duties of my sanctuary for you. So, they had not kept the commandments concerning the temple, and they had brought in uncircumcised Gentiles, not only uncircumcised in the flesh, uncircumcised in the heart. Gentiles who really didn't care to be Jewish or to be anything close to it. They didn't want to be Ger or Ger Toshah. And they brought them in and had them do the temple duties so that the priest could kick back and relax. Thus said Yehovah Elohim, let no alien uncircumcised in spirit and flesh enter my sanctuary. No alien whatsoever among the people of Israel, but the Levites who forsook me when Israel went astray, straying from me and following their fetishes, shall suffer their punishment. They shall be servitors in my sanctuary, appointed over the temple gate and performing the chores of the temple. They shall slaughter the burnt offerings and the sacrifices for the people. In other words, I gave this to you as a glorious gift, but since you thought of it as a chore, I'll just assign you the chore. It can also be your punishment. One way or another, you're going to do what I set you apart to do. Does that make any sense? Okay? Can we kind of go back to the whole, what we were talking about in the Genesis teaching earlier? Okay? One way or another, he ended up where he sent him. Talking about Lot. He made a bargain. No, I don't want to go where you're sending me. Let me go over here. And Elohim said, okay, I'll let you go over there. I'll give you that. But he got there. It wasn't what he expected. And he ended up going where he'd been told to go anyway. They shall attend on them and serve them, because they served Yisrael in the presence of their fetishes and made them stumble into guilt. Therefore declares Yehovah Elohim, I have sworn concerning them that they shall suffer their punishment. They shall not approach me to serve me as priests, to come near any of my sacred offerings and most holy things. They shall bear their shame for the abominations that they committed. I will make them watchmen of the temple. Wait a minute. Watchmen of the temple. Wouldn't that be like the Haggai? The Haggai? You know what that sounds like? I will make them watchmen over the temple. The guardian word. To perform all its chores, everything that needs to be done in it. But the Levitical priests descended from Zadok, who maintained the service of my sanctuary when the people of Israel went astray from me. They shall approach me to minister to me. They shall stand before me to offer me fat and blood, declares Yehovah Elohim. They alone may enter my sanctuary, and they alone shall approach my table to minister to me, and they shall keep my charge. And when they enter the gates of the inner court, they shall wear linen vestments. They shall have nothing woolen upon them when they minister inside the gates of the inner court. They shall have linen turbans on their heads and linen breeches on their loins. They shall not gird themselves with anything that causes sweat. When they go out to the outer court where the people are, they shall remove the vestments in which they minister and shall deposit them in the sacred chambers. They shall put on other garments, lest they make the people consecrated by contact with their vestments. Think about that. Think about that. It gets taught all the time that you can't have the holy with the unholy, because the unholy will make the holy unholy. Will make the sanctified unsanctified. To some degree, that's true. You can't put bacon on a hamburger, take it off, and eat it, and the hamburger be kosher. Right? Okay? You can't do that. But, isn't this an interesting thought? What is holy, what is sanctified, can make the unsanctified sanctified. And if Elohim has said, don't make that sanctified, then we can't. And I have people all the time say, so what if there's pork in that? Pray over it, he'll sanctify it. No. He says you cannot profane his name by making what is not holy, holy. They shall neither shave their heads, nor let their hair go untrimmed. They shall keep their hair trimmed. No priest shall drink wine when he enters into the inner court. Does that say no priest shall ever drink wine? Okay. Now, I've heard people say, well, we're kings and priests, and it says the priest can't drink wine. No, it says a priest can't drink wine when he's going into the inner court. When he's in the outer court, when he's outside the temple, when he's been invited into a home, he can drink wine. All right, unless he's under the Nazarite law, that's a whole other thing. He can drink wine, and yet people use this. The prohibitionists used it way back during Prohibition. See it right here. It says it's not holy to drink wine. It's not holy and sanctified to be in the inner court. If you're outside the inner court, it doesn't apply. And besides, most of those people who are pushing prohibition, I really doubt they had any Levitical blood, and it doesn't apply to them anyway. They shall not marry widows or divorced women. They may marry only virgins of the stock of Beit Yisrael, or widows who are widows of priests. Okay? What you think about this? A lot of people throw this out in the marriage laws. Well, okay, if you're a widow, you're not supposed to remarry. See right here, it says a man can't remarry a widow. Actually, if you read the whole text, it says that a man who is a priest, cannot marry a widow unless she is the widow of another priest. Why? Because he still has an obligation to keep the law that if his brother dies and has no descendants, he should marry his widow and give him descendants for his name. Give him a heritage. Okay? We cannot marry, or a priest cannot marry a divorced woman. He can marry a virgin of the stock of Beit Yisrael, or widows who are widows of priests. That's who he's allowed to marry. Okay? People try to make this apply to everyone. It does not apply to everyone. It applies to to the Levites, to Levi, it specifically applies to the descendants of Zadok, not to all Levites. Do we see that? Is it important to read context? They shall declare to my people what is sacred and what is profane, and inform them what is clean and what is unclean. Okay? They have the obligation to do this teaching. So when a Levite, especially one descendant from Zadok, tells us that something is clean or unclean, we better listen. Even if we think we see something different in Scripture, we better sit down and study on it really, really, really hard, because that's their job. It's our job to teach the nations. If we're elders, it's our job to teach the congregation, but it's their job to teach the whole world, starting with Beit Yisrael. In lawsuits, too, it is they who shall act as judges. They shall decide them in accordance with my rules. It doesn't say with man's rules. They shall preserve my teaching and my laws regarding all my fixed occasions, and they shall maintain the sanctity of my Sabbaths. We don't have any Levites, especially none of the line of Zadok, here in this community that I know of, and so we have to stand up and do it on our own. But if we had one here, if Bishop Halevi, I don't know whether or not he's a Zadok, I've never asked him. I would think that he would have told me if he was. But if he was here, that would be his responsibility to teach this community the appointed times and to maintain the sanctity of the Sabbath. And as much as I believe I keep the Sabbath well, if he came into this building today and told me, you're not keeping Sabbath appropriately, let me teach you, I would sit down and listen. Not just because he's my fellow elder on our board, but because he's a Levite. A priest shall not defile himself by entering a house where there is a dead person. He shall defile himself only for father or mother, son or daughter, brother or unmarried sister. After he has become, there's that thing again, once she's married, she's not his responsibility. He has no rights to deal with, even with her death. After he has become clean, 7 days shall be counted off for him. You notice it doesn't say he'll do it. He became unclean. He made a decision to make him unclean. It doesn't say that he decides when it's up, when the time's up. Somebody else has to count the days for him. And on the day that he re-enters the inner court of the sanctuary to minister in the sanctuary, he shall present his sin offering, declares Yahweh Elohim. This shall be their portion. And I love this. This explains this so well. People always ask me why. It's not fair. The Levites had such a huge job. They had so many responsibilities, still do. But if they had so many responsibilities, why couldn't they have a piece of land in Israel? And I said, well, they had the temple. But that didn't do anything for the ones who were out among the tribes. I love this. This is beautiful. This shall be their portion, for I am their portion. We got the land, they got the creator of the land. I'd say they got the better deal, not the harder deal. And no holding shall be given them in Yisrael, for I am their holding. He didn't want them to have material things because it would distract them from their job of serving him and teaching about him. Remember the story of Lot earlier? And I said the reason he wanted to go to a different city instead of into the hills is because he had become dependent, or his family at least had become dependent upon the luxuries of the city. Okay? It's the same principle. The meal offerings, sin offerings, and guilt offerings shall be consumed by them. Everything prescribed in Yisrael shall be theirs. All the choice first fruits of every kind, and all the gifts of every kind of all your contributions shall go to the priests. You shall further give the first of the yield of your baking to the priests, to the priest, that a blessing may rest upon your home. Okay, I hear people when we talk about the Levitical priesthood, they say, "I'm so glad that's not standing anymore." And I'm like, "Yes, it is." And they said, "No, I'm so glad it's not standing anymore because I wouldn't want to have to give all that stuff to the priest." Why? Because they're caught up in this mindset of we own what we have. It's never ours to begin with. He gives us 10 and takes back 1. But we better give that 1 to him in a righteous manner, not in your local congregation's offering plate. If there's a priest among you, if we found a person, if I don't care who it is, if somebody walked in here and could prove to me that they were a Levite, I'd say let's take tithes and give it to him, and he should be sending it to Jerusalem, for the building of the temple, at least a portion of it. But I have people tell me, "I'm so glad that's not in place anymore. I wouldn't want to have to give 10% and the first and the best of everything I had." And I ask them, "Have you not read? We don't do it for their benefit. We do it because he commanded it and because it benefits us." I'm going to read that again. All your contributions shall go to the priest. You shall further give the first of the yield of your baking to the priest, that a blessing may rest upon your home. Those people who tell me that they are glad, quote unquote, there's no Levitical priesthood, I wish there was a Levite here. If there was a Levite among us, I think I'd give a double tithe every chance I got because I want a blessing on my home. And if you can't see past the fleshly, worldly desires and see what comes at the end of that giving, probably need to check and see. You may be physically circumcised and not spiritually circumcised. Priests shall not eat anything, whether bird or animal, that died or was torn by beasts. And what is that? That is the ultimate commandment of kosher. Because an animal can be kosher to slaughter and eat, but if it dies, it is torn by beasts, if it gets hit by a car in today's society, it's no longer kosher. People forget that. Even people I know who, in all other manners, keep kosher, they'll pick up roadkill. They hit a deer and they take it, bring it home, and they butcher it, and that meat is tainted by the blood and by the excrement from the bowels, and they eat it anyway. And I say, have you not read? For it is written. We can't do that. Once it's damaged like that, it is no longer sanctified. It is no longer holy. It is no longer acceptable for his children. He's saying, people say, well, why didn't he say they have to keep kosher? He just did. He said, not only do they have to keep kosher, if it's kosher, if it's a kosher animal and it dies incorrectly, then they have to keep that part of the commandment too. He held them to the highest standard. We should hold ourselves to the highest standard. We do in my house. I would challenge everyone else to do the same. Midrash? Yes.
In that last verse, that's just a thought. Like, what if an animal gets hit by a car and doesn't die, but it's athletics? I mean, it's going to kill it. And you get down to the part that.
If you, okay. If I'm out hunting and I see a deer limping, I'm not going to shoot that deer because I don't know why it's limping. I don't know what's wrong inside of it. It might have been hit by a car. It might have got hung in a fence. It might have a disease. Okay? Now, I might put that animal down out of mercy because it's suffering, but I'm going to bury it. I'm not going to eat it. I probably wouldn't even do that because if it's a disease, it can carry over to the animal. Okay? I would do everything I could to bury it without really having to hit the animal. Okay? Because it's somehow unclean. That would be my answer to that. What do you think, Mo?
I agree with what you said, absolutely. Generally, you don't see this injury, especially with the idea that I've been carrying a disease sometimes. With that thing not being through animals, so that got on down. But one other thing that I wanted to say, you were talking about tithing to the priests and how people today say, well, I'm glad that's not in effect anymore. Because that would be that to support the priest that way, you know. So interestingly, the same people who would make a statement like that don't realize that even to this day, they should be supporting their priests that way. They should be giving them the very best they possibly can. Even though they're not Levites, nevertheless, it's an attitude of worship towards God.
Well, I agree that with standing synagogues, we should support the synagogues and the ministries of the synagogues. However, I do not believe that someone like myself, who I have no evidence that I'm a Levite, I don't believe that I can require a tithe. I can accept an offering for the benefit of the ministry, but I can't take a tithe.
No, I'm not saying that they should be tithing to the priests or ministers or whatever, that they should try to do their very best to support their pastor's ministry if they really believe it. Most ministries I don't believe in at all. I think, but nevertheless, if I'm involved with one, then I try to support the best I possibly can. But I want to make a statement. I've said this before. When we were in Worldwide Church of God, we paid our tithes. We tried to do the best we possibly could. We tried to keep up with it, absolutely, as fully as we possibly could. And I remember people griping in the church when it's third year tithe, because that's an extra burden on the household. But the interesting thing about it, my mom and I always thought to ourselves, we didn't dread it because there was always a blessing.
Right.
And I know they say tithing is no longer, but there was always this blessing. Somehow we always got through. Things would open up for us. Money would come to us. And I always found that very strange.
Before I understood that you had to be careful what you considered a tithe and who you gave it to, long before I understood that, I got a conviction that and it comes from the book of Malachi. And he says, you will say, well, can a man rob God? How would a man rob God? From tithes and offerings. And I read that and it broke my heart because I had not been giving to the ministry that I was involved in. Well, at that point I was, but there had been years before where I didn't. And I felt so bad about it. I went back and I calculated how much I thought I had robbed God. And I started giving a double tithe, quote unquote, although that wasn't really what it was because I wasn't giving it to a priest. I didn't understand that at the time. And I went and I calculated how much it was. I started giving a double tithe or double offering, I guess. And I did it consistently for a long time. And eventually when I got to where I calculated that I had made up what I had robbed God, and the next day I met Lisa. And I honestly believe that that was not only a matter of her not being ready yet, and I had been searching for her, but it was also a matter of that was the blessing that came from my keeping that commandment. And I still feel that. I don't know if she feels blessed or not. She might say, "Holy cow! I should have given more offerings. I would have found a better husband." But I had more back offerings to give because I'm so much older. Anybody else?
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
It seems very insignificant, I know. But you know, whenever we went to church, we always had to wear our very best. We had to be extremely neat, clean. Our clothes had to be look perfect. And whenever we were officiating, like I was an usher, and I would also give opening prayer by once a month. Your clothes had to be spotless, your shoes shine, you had to be thoroughly clean, your mind, you had to clean your mind, and then the heels of your shoes even had to be clean when you stepped up to the podium. I remember one morning, I was getting ready to go to Sabbath services, and there was this spot on the jacket, the only jacket I could wear, had a large spot on it. There was no way of cleaning that off. My mom tried to get it off, I tried to get it off. You know, and so I thought, what am I going to do? Because I have to officiate, and I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. You know, we closed the closet door and we went and prayed. A little bit later, we went back and it was gone. I'm saying there was a blessing in everything that we did at that time because God is with us and He helps us. Because we were trying to honor Him, you know?
I believe, and I know a lot of people are very down on worldwide, and on, what was the founder's name? Herbert Armstrong. A lot of people are very negative about him. I believe he was a prophet and apostle for his time, and I believe that his work became corrupted over time, and I believe it's a shame that a lot of people only know how it ended and not what he began with. He reading his teachings, he was going in the right direction. He had a lot of truth, and unfortunately, because of the way that it ended, it was a lot of people look at it and say, well, the whole thing was a scam, the whole thing was a sham, and what have you. But if you look at where he was in his faith walk early on and what he was trying to teach to people that people just weren't getting, or that people thought they could market it somehow and make a dime off of it. Like we talked about, there was a song that you all sang every Sabbath, basically, and the next thing you know, it's out in the world and somebody's making, a record off of it. And it's a shame that people saw it as a means of monetary gain. And a lot of I'm not trying to judge them, but they were called ministers of the flock, and a lot of them became very caught up in how much money can I make off of this. And that's not what Herbert Armstrong started out as. Herbert Armstrong started out as a man who had his eyes open to Torah, to Sabbath, to kosher, to the high holy days. And I don't agree with 100% of what he taught, but I'd say about 95% of what I've read that he taught, I hands down agree with. And maybe the other 5% I just haven't seen yet. I don't know. Or maybe he just hadn't had some things revealed that I've seen because we're farther down and the revelation is more abundant now. But yeah, I know you always say you hesitate to bring up. In this circle, you don't have to hesitate to bring it up. I think we all know that what you learned in those early days was very, very much true. Anybody else?